Hello everybody, it's Schmidt from Rocket Lasso and welcome to my R25 presentation. There's a lot to cover and as always, not that much time to do it, so I don't want to waste any time. If you're not already following Rocket Lasso, you can follow at Rocket Lasso on all of the different things if you want to follow me for tutorials and live streams and the plugins that we're making. So in this video, we're going to be covering a whole bunch of the new features of 25, ending with the power of capsules, where you can drag nodes directly into your object manager now to do different selections and modeling commands. But we'll talk about that when we get there. For now, let's jump on in. Into R25, the first thing you're going to see immediately jump out is the all new interface. There is new colors, there are new icons, there's a new layout, lots and lots of changes all over the place. If you want to ease into this new layout a little bit, something you can do is we've got these new tabs up here to change our layout. You could go to new layout, switch that off, and now you're seeing the layouts from the older versions. So we can click standard, and now we're seeing not the layout from 25, not even the layout from 24, but going back to R23's layout. So a way of getting used to the color scheme and the icons kind of in this traditional place. I will switch to the new layouts though and go to standard so I can see those layouts. We might as well start with this quick access we have to the layouts up in the upper right. Yours might look slightly different because I have customized mine, because you can click on this plus drop down and see all of the different presets. So if I want to say sculpt, I can turn sculpt on and leave that on in the interface up here. So whenever I want to, I can very quickly click on the sculpt layout or the model layout or the grooming layout, and it's going to quickly switch between these. And because it's so quick to change between these, I actually do find myself switching between these pretty often. I made myself a custom node layout so I could have this docked on the left side just in case I wanted to get access to that quickly. And switching between those is just something I find myself constantly doing. Sticking up in this top bar, I can go to the left and you'll see I have a bunch of different tabs for all the different scene files that I currently have open. This is incredibly useful. I really like it. I can switch really quickly to a different scene file, click to a different one. It is a fairly unique thing that Cinema 4D does, that you can have multiple scene files open at the same time. So quick access to those has been incredibly useful. Even the idea of me being able to select something, copy it, go to a different scene file, paste it into that one, being able to merge those things and switch quickly is great. And we also have this plus button, so you can click on that and open up a brand new document. In addition to that, right-clicking, we can duplicate a project, close all the projects, close the other projects, open up a new project, or if we go into an open file, I can say show an explorer, which popped open in the other window, and you can see that it'll automatically find the folder for you, which is something that is actually a bit of a pain in general, so that is pretty useful there. Closing that, let us jump into the main window. Much like a browser tab, we can mouse over any of these and we get the little X, and I can close any one of those windows down, which is pretty handy. Additional layout changes include the moving of all of the object menu over to this side over on the right. What I like about this is that all of these objects are now hanging out next to the objects themselves. All these will be created in the object manager, and that is where they are. Some things have been rearranged where like text objects hang out together. The null is hanging out by itself. One that I like is the generator and NURBS folders have gotten combined here. Let me tab over to S24. In traditional, older cinema, there was two different drop-downs, one with all of these objects and one with all of these, and I would always click on the wrong folder. Even if I was pretty sure I was clicking on this, it's like, where's the sweep? No, not that one, it's in this one. Oh wait, no, it was in this one. Happened to me all the time. So having those merged actually does speed things up quite a bit for me. And a couple other things have been rearranged. The text objects hang out together, the null's been moved out, but everything here is, I think, pretty clear. I still trip over it a little bit, but I've gotten used to it very, very quickly. I think that you will as well. The next thing to notice is the larger viewport, which is always a good thing, but obviously you can't magically make more space. So what went away? Well, tabbing back to S24, you'll notice that the coordinate manager is not there and the material manager is not there. Now, think about this. How often are you using the materials? You're going to use them a lot, probably at a very particular time. But 95% of the rest of the time, you are not worried about using these materials. So there's this new concept called hot corners, where in each of the four corners around your viewport, there is a new hotspot. And if you click on that, we can open up the material manager. Again, the material manager has moved over near the objects where it's going to be applied. And something that's really nice is that these are now horizontal. It's stacked vertically, meaning we can read the names. This now looks a lot like the new asset browser inside of Cinema, so we can change the scale of them very easily. We can make them larger, But the most important thing is if we had a really long name, we are able to read that name all the way across, where before they would get cropped out really easily. So if we collapse that down, those will go away. We only need to see it some of the time, but everything else continues to work. You can double click creating a new material, click the plus to create a drop down for more specific ones. If you do, however, have it collapse down, something that's pretty neat is you could right click on an object, and down at the bottom, you can say make a new material. So if I click a new material, I was able to make it without even going into the material manager. Double clicking on it, you will actually go into a version of the material manager, able to be manipulated that way. Also, right clicking on an object, you can scroll down and get other material types, or even find your existing materials, even with their nice long names, and click on any one of those, and it will apply instantly that way as well. In the bottom right of your viewport is the hotspot for the coordinate manager. That will pop this out. You can see all your same position, rotation, scale. Those got rearranged because position and then rotation are the more common ones. And then you've got your reset transform button, which is the reset PSR button from the past. Get rid of that. In the bottom left, we can get a version of the timeline. I'll make that a little bit larger. And here's the timeline. Here are our keyframes, or we can go to F curves if we are so inclined, and that can just get collapsed away as well. And in the upper left is the asset browser. Clicking on that, it will appear right where that icon is on the left, and you get instant access to all of your different objects and anything you want to find inside of Cinema that way. So of course that was a new feature in S24, so we won't go over all the specifics of that, although there are a couple of new features that we might touch upon. Oh yeah, as a bit of a tease, everything you're seeing here in the viewport is a parametric setup. You'll see if I twirl down this 2, that this is just a motext with a series of the new capsules inside it to create this effect. So we're going to be covering that a little bit later on as a opening up a new window, which is very handy. I do that all the time. Let's talk about the context sensitive menus. Things like the mode. We are currently in model mode, and we've also got our snapping settings and our work plane modes. Things like that have moved into the middle. And that you can kind of imagine that as we are changing the mode sort of for everything below it. In addition to that, on the left bar, we now have context sensitive icons. So currently we are in model mode. So these are things that are important for model, like moving, rotating, scaling. We can draw brand new splines, things like that. But if we were to make a polygon object and make it editable, then I can go into polygon mode. And now we've got a bunch of icons unique to being in polygon mode. Selecting this top one, we've got an icon for beveling. We can select this one on the right, click extrude and extrude out. So these are now in the context of the polygon mode. But we can of course go to edge and get different edge tools, go to point mode and get different point tools. So context sensitive, that could even change depending on your paint mode or UV editing mode. So that is the idea behind that. If at any point you're not sure what a particular icon does, you can always mouse over it. And in the status bar in the bottom left, you're going to see a quick description of it. So this is the bridge tool, and it even tells you the shortcuts of MB or just the letter B. Those pop up really quickly. Now, that is the context sensitive menus. Back to model mode. Now, in my full Rocket Lasso What's New in R25 video, I actually show you how to create some dynamic palettes from scratch, but we don't have that much time, so let's move on. Deleting that cube, let's close out the interface by customizing it a little bit. So you can always right click on any icon anywhere. That will open up the customize palettes. And we've been able to do this for a while, but something that I know a lot of people don't like this centered. They maybe want it on the left, and we've got this separator bar. You can double click on the separator bar or any icon if you want to, and that will delete it. So now those are all on the left. And then you can customize things by adding in additional elements. Let's say you want to add in a different tool or maybe your favorite plugin. So let's search for Ricochet. So there's a tool that we make. I can dock that in the interface now. Closing it will automatically kind of lock that layout in, and that is now on the left. These are all lined up with the extra icon. So clicking on the layout dropdown, I can say save as startup layout or save layout as, and just call this custom 1. And instantly it will appear in this top bar ready to be jumped to whenever you need that custom layout. Another thing worth noting is in the assets browser, if we track down something, let's say you are using the motion capture model, we got this puppet figure. Let's say you're using that all the time. You want to dock that as well. Right click, customize the palettes, and let's drag this wherever we want. Let's drag it down here below. Close that, close the window, and now we've got the puppet figure right there whenever you need it. Clicking that, it'll just load it directly in from the assets browser. So any asset you create can also be generated as an icon to be docked in your interface. Deleting that. Switching gears, I'll move into the asset browser and track down the motion capture. I would like, let's do some jumping, and static jump should work here. So close the asset browser. Now we've got some motion capture animation, which of course is just coming inside of Cinema 4D, and it's jumping around, doing its thing. Let's talk about the track modifier tag. In order to show this, I would like to make a duplicate of this entire setup and select the entire skeleton, which you can do by middle mouse clicking, which will select every single child, and change all the colors to be identical. Let's just make them a nice bright red. Something worth noting as well is, now that I've got this color chooser open, no matter where you open up your color chooser, you'll see that you don't have to hit OK or cancel anymore. You don't even have to click this X, you can just click out of it and it closes it down and acknowledges the color. In fact, the color is automatically getting applied as you change it. You can see it updating directly in the viewport. So it's now a live parameter instead of a locked away menu. Anyway, that's entirely colorized now. Selecting our static jump A, I can right click and add a new animation track modifier tag. Hitting play out of the gate, it's not going to be doing anything, both look identical. We won't see anything in the beginning, but if we turn on the entire hierarchy, make sure you do that, I always forget to turn that on, it will see every single joint that is a child. Let's crank the strength all the way up to max, and instantly we're going to see a very different and very floppy animation springing all over the place. And that is because we are currently in spring mode. So if we start adding in different settings, we can say crank up the stiffness. Now you can see it's going to be trying to stay in place a lot more accurately. And this is a good way of maybe smoothing out motion capture information. You see if we start frame by framing that, actually let's go to a point where he's jumping. So if I frame by frame that, it's barely lagging behind, but it's getting rid of any jitter that might be there. Now this is good mocap, so we don't need to worry about that so much, but let's play with some additional settings. Cranking up the drag, we can have that really slow down and ease out, so it's going to smooth that motion out even more. If we go easier on the stiffness, you see it's going to be very floaty and flowing as it moves between transitions. I'll decrease the strength back down to 0 and then click on mode. You'll see we have several different modes: spring, posterization, noise, and smooth. I will not be talking about noise and smooth in this video. Check out the full one for a little more information on those. But let's check out posterization. Selecting that one doesn't look different at all in the beginning, but if we start adding some step frames on it, you're going to start seeing sort of this echo happening. So let's just jump this up to something pretty blatant like 15. And now you can see that the colored skeleton is only updating every 15th frame. There's a really fun way of getting some stop motion on top of things. But one thing I did not realize in my previous video that is pretty cool is we can actually layer up these track modifier tags. So I'll move that all the way to the right and then hold down Control as I make a duplicate of it. Now we have two different track modifier tags. So adding a new spring on top of it will give it some strength. And now that should be snapping between poses. Let's temporarily just see the new one we're working from. And you can see that it is jumping from pose to pose to pose, but then the smoothing, the springiness is happening after the fact. So we can just play around with some different settings there. Let's go easy on the drag and you'll see it jump, jump, jump. It's gonna look pretty crazy. But if we add a decent amount of stiffness there, you can see we're gonna snap to these poses, but there's a little bit of springiness to it, which is pretty neat. And then combining that with drag, you can really stop that wiggle, but you really feel those couple of frames that precede every single one of those really harsh steps. So combining these really opens up a lot of possibilities on top of an already keyframed character or animation, or especially motion capture, where we are able to extract all this new cool stuff, which obviously is not something we were able to do in the past. So that was a really easy one to get through. Opening up this folder, I've got a couple different vector files in here. First of all, I've got the half-res SVG file. Dragging that directly in, you'll see that we can import that directly. Click OK, and it opens up a brand new file with an SVG. This would not have opened in previous version Cinema, just say unknown file format, but there it is, easily in Cinema. Even more important to me, though, is the ability to import Illustrator files. Now, before, we used to have to open up a file in Illustrator and export it as Illustrator 8 in order to get Cinema to see the splines at all. But no longer. This file was created in the newest version of Illustrator, and in no way was it created for this presentation. It was just a file created by my friends over at Looskis. Let me drag that in to Cinema 4D R25. It opens up a menu, the Adobe Illustrator import menu. I would like to leave it default because it will create vector object for me. Clicking OK. And we see it pop in. As mentioned, this was created by my friends at Loose Keys. They create all sorts of animations and explainer videos. You should check them out from loosekeys.com. But you'll see that this file, completely unprepared for cinema, has now come in as a series of extrudes and sweeps. Now I don't want to see any of these extra grids or anything, so I'll go to my personal preset of Chris. That turns them all off. Now selecting this new vector import object, we've got a bunch of different options inside of it. First of all, hitting NB, we can see that we've got a whole bunch of different polygons. If I zoom in, you'll see it's actually quite subdivided, and I always like things running nice and quick. So the first thing I'll do is go to spline settings and say angle, subdivide every 15 degrees. So nowhere near as many polygons. We don't need all of those. Zooming back out again, hitting NA, we can see the overall file. As mentioned, not prepped at all for this, and it just comes in each layer, pushing further and further out from the one before. So doing things like doing a path spread. Let's put more space in between each of them. You'll see each of them separated even more. Let's drop that back down to 0.5. In addition to that, we can say that we have the extrusions. Let's extrude these way more, so each one can extrude up to 50. So these really start intersecting and layering up, really feeling like they are an entire singular mass going. All the colors came in. Those came in actually directly on the objects, which I'll show you by clicking hierarchy. If I click this hierarchy button, it will expose all of the children. Inside is a null. Inside of that null is a series of layers that would have been inside the Illustrator file. So I could select this speeder here. So here's a land speeder. It also has this shadow associated with it. So I'll select that one. You see it's this upper shadow. I'll just make that a child. Now selecting that land speeder, I can click and drag it around, and that is ready to keyframe or animate. Move this anywhere I want in the scene, ready to go directly from Illustrator. Then selecting our overall file, let's play around a bit with, let's say, caps. Inside the caps, let's give this a size of, let's see, is 3 too much? Let's try 3. And yeah, we get this nice extrusion going everywhere. Change the segments if we were so inclined. Drop that down to 1. Then go back to the object, and there's the sweep stroke going. And I like that we have a rounding in here as well. So let's give that a little more depth so we can actually see those lines, and add some rounding in so that those can get some highlights. You can see up here that those are technically strokes. So dropping the rounding down, you see how those get nice and rounded, and how much pop you get, obviously, from creating bevels on top of objects. So you'll see that this is pretty handy. This direct live link into Cinema from an Illustrator file is pretty neat. Now, any changes I make might be lost, but you can always update your Illustrator file, and clicking this button would refresh it back to that original file. And you see a whole host of additional settings that you could click on and play around with, in addition to being able to go into any one of these files and select the individual tags, which are showing what the color is going to be. If I were to select one of these splines, you'll see that the basic tab has changed to the color of the object directly out of Illustrator as well. So very nice to get this functionality inside of vanilla Cinema 4D. Oh yeah, and as I did in my other R25 demo, something you just got to do when you bring something into Cinema. Let's create a floor, scoot that down a bit. Let's make this not quite as thick as it was. So let's say this goes back to an extrude depth of, I don't know what it was default. Let's right click on one of these handles, and that will set back to default of 10. And now, right clicking, I will add a simulation rigid body. And without changing anything else, hitting play, we will see every single part fall, collapse, and collide properly as everything falls down onto the ground. Instant dynamics for a scene file directly out of Illustrator. The next new feature to tackle inside of Cinema 4D R25 is going to be presets. Opening up a brand new file, I think a really good way of demoing this off is the matrix object. So creating a matrix object. Important to note that presets work with anything that has parameters. So yes, objects have parameters. So selecting that, we've got our default of 40 by 40, but I would like to make a default of 10 by 10 by 10. So that's the only change I'll make. Clicking the drop down up here in the upper right of any object that has parameters, we can click the drop down and say save preset. And I'll say 10x by 10x by 10. Hit OK, and that is now saved as a preset. Let's make another one. Let's say that this is 1 by 100 by 1. Once again, clicking the drop down, say save preset, and let's do 100x tall. Okay, and that's a secondary preset. So I now have the option to click this drop down and say, okay, I would like to go back to the default I would like to go to my 10 by 10 by 10, or even selecting this 100 tall and jumping it up to that one. Even better, we can click the word, the 100 tall, and that's going to pop open a small version of the asset browser, and you get a little preview of each one, and you can just double click on either one of those and switch over to that as its mode. But we are not limited to just creating an overall preset. We can also change specific settings. So as a partial preset, I can grab this count again. Actually, let's change the size. So selecting the size, let's make a 50 by 50 by 50. And that will be the only parameter I want to change. So right clicking on it, I'll say I would like this to be a save selected as preset. And this will be a 50 by 50 by 50 preset. Hitting OK, I can now click the drop down and you'll see that we get this full circle, which means it's the entire object, or we just have this small override. So I could go back to this 100 tall, but then say, you know what, I want to modify just the 50 by 50 by 50. Changing that will only change that parameter. You see that 50 by 50 by 50 have now propagated into this singular object. In addition to that, you can click the word again, and it shows that entire list. But now you see as I mouse over it that we could not only save this as a favorite, but we can save one of these as a default. So let's say that this 10 by 10 by 10 is going to be the default. So clicking that crown, that has now been crowned as the default. So if I were to delete this matrix, open up a new file, close Cinema, reopen it, whatever I do, if I create a brand new matrix object, that is automatically loading in as the default functionality. You can always go back to your regular default, but this will now make it so that you have that many less clicks when you create a new object. And this could be anywhere. As I mentioned, anything with a parameter. So the next one we'll make will be a material. Click on the material hotspot and double click making a new material. So we'll just do a couple simple ones. Inside of this material, I'd like it to be, let's say, just the color channel. Inside the color channel, set that to a red color. We'll go bright red. Save that as a preset. Go to save preset and we'll just say red. Nice and simple. And then let's go to basic and make another new one. So let's say that we want a luminant, and we'll just do a full luminance channel. So let's say bright yellow green. And let's just go full green and save that as a preset. Save preset, and we'll just say loom green, call it whatever we want to call it, and hit OK. And now that has been saved. So whenever I make a new material, I could say, hey, let's get to that quick red preset and have that set, or go to the luminant green. And again, you could limit it to only a couple of specific parameters if you wanted to. You could build out different luminance channels, build out different reflectance channels, and load in a partial preset. In addition to that, we can go in and make any shader that we like. So my favorite, of course, is something like a noise. Selecting the noise, I can go inside of it, and the noise has parameters. So in the upper right, there's those same presets. So my favorite noise to go to is a nice knocky. It's nice and organic. So along these lines, let's say I just want to make a variation on it. So let's change the C to something else random, and let's invert it. So I'll grab the low clip and crank it, and grab the high clip and lower it down. So there we go, an alternative knocky look. So selecting save preset, I'll type in knocky 2, hit OK, and now that has been saved as a preset. So we can go back to default, we can go back to knocky 2. There's not a preview image, but you can always click on that and I can crown that and say, hey, that is now the default that will load every time I make a new material. I don't actually want it to be, so I won't set that because I know I'll forget. But anyway, we have now set that as a potential preset inside of the noise. Into another new material, I want to find something that has a spline parameter. So we'll make another shader, and we can make a filter shader. Inside of the filter shader is again something that we can control with presets. So inside of here, I can scroll down and you can see that we can enable curves, and we get all these different curves. We can create new spline presets. Now I've already made a bunch that I don't want to lose. So let's just make something kind of crazy where it's kind of going up and down. And we kind of get this nice oscillation traveling up near the top. Let's even put one more there. So let's save that as a preset. Save preset, and we can save that directly as a spline preset, not as part of the overall object preset, but within the spline presets. So saying that this will just be bumpy and hit OK, I can now click load preset, and we're going to see a whole bunch of presets that I made for myself all represented here. So I've got my arc and a bell curve and easing in and easing out. In addition to that, you've also got your built-in cinema ones, which make it really easy to switch between those different presets. So instead of drawing them out manually every time, it's really nice to be able to just click on any one of these. Let's get this cosine, double clicking, and now the cosine is loaded in, or load in the bumpy and get that back directly. It even remembers what point I had selected when I bring that back in. So creating a couple presets there can save you a lot of time, and there's already the Maxon built ones. So between making your own and the Maxon ones, there's a lot of power to be found there. And then one thing that I didn't realize immediately, but yeah, totally works, is something that was of particular interest to me as a plugin developer is that, let's open a new file, any plugins can also have their settings saved. So if you have X particles and you're making some crazy individual settings on a particular X particles node, or for me, I can click extensions, drop down, and I'll make a slicer and create a landscape object so we can see something, drop it as a child, and make the landscape way taller. Selecting the slicer, let's make a whole bunch of different slices and make it taller by default. And hitting play, I'll give it a bit of rate, not too much, just a little bit, and you see that traveling upward. Reaching up for the preset, I can say save preset, and this will be 42 plus rate. Say OK. And now if I were to delete this and make a brand new slicer, of course, clicking the drop down, I can find 42 plus rate. And now those settings have changed and slicer is ready to be fed any object we want to feed it. So give that a pause and open up another new file. Close a couple of these that we don't need anymore. Give ourselves a little more room. Okay, now the topic we are tackling is scene nodes, nodes in general, and the new capsules. We could spend the next 48 hours talking about scene nodes and never run out of things to talk about. But in this case, let's focus on some of the newer things that were added in. I would like to load in the original node preset. I actually made my own, but let me open up the vanilla one just so you can see it. Clicking on nodes, we have a layout to show nodes. In this layout, we can see our data inspector, the console, the viewport, and here is the node window. In addition to that, usually you would open the assets browser and then click on nodes, and other nodes travel into some of these different menus, whichever one you might want. And I like changing this to list view and shrinking it all the way down. And that's pretty much what my personal preset does, is it automatically opens this up. Typically, you'd have this on more than one monitor, so you'd have a little bit more space, but let's make this a little larger so you can see what I'm doing. Let's go into nodes, and inside of here, we can travel into the geometry primitives, or actually even better, geometry generators. These in the past were limited to being dragged into the scene nodes. So it would be something like grab this mesh primitive and drag it in here, and now we've got this node. But now these can be dragged directly into your object manager. So now we have a mesh primitive that instantly exists right here in the main scene file in the object manager. And we can change this to all the different types, a capsule or an oil tank or pretty much any of the default cinema presets. But now this didn't have to be in the nodes at all. We can delete that. In fact, we don't even specifically need this layout. We could just be working entirely within the world of the viewport and the object manager. But we're all familiar with the way mesh primitives work. We don't need that. Let's get rid of that and grab something we don't have, something like the spline primitive. Dragging this in, this does have a bunch of different spline types that we're used to, like the flower and the formula and the star. Those are all here. But there's a couple other experimental types that are not fully implemented, but things like the 7-segment display, which can be dragged directly into the object manager, as mentioned. We can change the size, but then we can type in any numbers that we want, and it's going to do a 7-sided display for those, or you can just type in a time like 6:30, and it'll display that as a time. There's other presets that are neat. We also have, this one's kind of funny, there is the segment spline, which is a straight spline, which is a primitive we've been wanting forever. And by grabbing length, I can make that larger. We can offset that to be entirely on the left or the right. So we can pivot directly from the central point, which is handy. So a nice straight line primitive right here in the object manager. We can manipulate this however we like. I can select that and throw that into a sweep, and into the sweep, throw a inside, and I can see that we are sweeping that spline. So a node has been made real in the object manager, which means we can entirely use it in our normal workflow. So there are some new object-based generators that we can drag directly in the object manager. The one I'd like to show you right now is actually the, it's under object, it is the global pins. If I drag this in, it's not really going to show much. In fact, we can go back to our regular standard view. It's not involved in nodes at all, except for dragging it in. So there's nothing showing up here, but that's because this generator, it is looking for a CSV file. Now, it doesn't come with a CSV file, so we need to track one down or make one. So it's actually pretty simple to do that. Let me drag this over. Here, I just searched for countries of the world, CSV, so comma, separated values, and then we want the latitude and longitude. Here you can see that this tool is looking for information about the latitude, longitude, potentially the magnitude, the name, and the color, but we don't need all of those. But we do want latitude and longitude. So I clicked on the very first one, as you can see here, and it opened this up, and I don't see any way of downloading this directly. So all I did was select here at the start, and then scrolled all the way to the bottom, and we got all these different countries, and select to the end, copy, and then in Google Sheets, I went and made a brand new file, and then select the very first cell, paste, and all the information is pasted in. You can always double click one of these bars and make it scale to the longest one. And the one thing we need to do here is scroll down because one of them doesn't have the proper info. Here you have US minor outlying islands. It doesn't have the information, so let's delete that one. So delete row, and I'll just name this countries. So now that that is there, I shall say download as a comma separated values CSV. So I click download, and that will indeed download for me. I can open that up, show in folder. So this opens up in my downloads. Why don't we copy this over into the proper folder? So moving into here, I've got a folder prepped, which has an image of the Earth. We'll worry about that in a minute. And copy our countries in to that download. Excellent. So now that is there. Back in Cinema now, in the global pins, let's load that CSV file in. So load it in. Here it is inside my global pins. Say open, and now that file has opened, and we'll see we got a little bit of stuff going on. We've got an actual globe showing up, but we need in the inputs, we need to link these directly to the object that we're working with. But before we do that, let's make it look more like a globe by creating a new material, double clicking. Inside there, I would like to load into the color channel this Earth picture. This is just a NASA image. Don't copy into my scene file. And I want it to show as full resolution. So in viewport, I'll say no scaling, so it's full resolution. Inside of global pins on the globe, it wants a material. So that's where I shall put that material. And instantly we can see the planet Earth properly. And let's go and fix our inputs. So under inputs, I'll go back to our Google Sheet. And I want the latitude, so I'll copy that and paste in latitude. And then longitude, we've got our own longitude. Just make sure they perfectly match. We don't have a magnitude, but we do have a name. So the name will be the country. Let's take the short name for now. So let's drag in short name. And then we're not really seeing much. Maybe there's something over there, one or two, but we need to go into our pins. No, actually our flight path. And currently it's only showing focused ones. And these are kind of based on the example airport file, but we don't need that. I'm gonna say focused only, no. So give that a second to load. And now we get a whole bunch of pins all popping in exactly where the information is saying that they are labeled. So we've got Mexico and Canada, the US. We can fly around over here into Europe and all these different pins labeling the different countries. Now, based on our CSV, we could say, you know what? The name isn't based on this short name. Let's have it be based on the regular long name. So I'll copy the word name, go back to inputs and say that the name should be based on the name. Now, there's a lot of text here, so let's give that a second to load in and generate all of that geometry. And there it goes. Now we can see the full name. So we got France and Spain and Portugal. So lots of information automatically coming in here. Just playing around with this a little bit more, we can click on the pins. The pins have different styles we can do. So the pin could be a flag. Once again, it's updating 246 countries, so it's going to take a second for all of that geometry to generate, but there we go. That pin has generated. And then where it gets really fun is with the flight paths. So currently it is showing all of them, but let's say, no, don't do focused only. We'll turn that off and instead truncate this so we only see one line. And what I would like to see is a flight from Canada, comma, United States. And I just know that that's the way they're typed. It has to be typed exactly as it is in the sheet, but we could also copy and paste it in if we need to. So now we are flying from Canada to the US, and let's add another comma and type in Mexico. So now, not Mexico, Mexico. And that should now also connect the US to Mexico. There's additional settings for that. We change the radius of the flight path. We could make that arc way further up. We could animate it as the line travels from one destination to the next one. And we can append and add additional elements on here. So we could say, let's do a flight from Cuba to Ecuador, because I can spell that one. And now we've got a link from Cuba, a separate line from Cuba to Ecuador. And we can link up as many of those as we wanted to here. The bigger point isn't that this asset exists. It's that this type of asset can exist. This type of asset can be built. So this one was made by Maxon. But if we go into our nodes, I could load up that same global pins. Let me drag it in here into the node view. And I can say, you know what? I want to edit that asset. So now we're actually going inside of that asset, and you can see all the different components that went into making this asset. And there's a good chance that some of these are going to be folders. Like here's a sort and filter folder. Inside here is more nodes that are doing something else as well. So that is a big, giant asset that is doing all this crazy stuff. And any CSV file, which is another attribute that's been added into Cinema. We're not going to get too much in there, but we've got this new import data, and you can bring in things like CSVs to extract information from it. So that is a big, giant, complicated asset that you have to use in specific ways, but you see all the power. Let's simplify. That was kind of going big right out of the gate because I didn't get a chance to show that one off in my other R25 video. So let's open up a new file. Go back to my custom node layout, and let's make something a little bit cleaner. Actually, I think we can be in standard mode. In fact, why don't we close these files? So close, and most of these we don't even need anymore. So let's just go to our what's new in Cinema 4D file, and let's look at making some of these. Here, I would like to simplify a whole bunch. We got all this extra stuff, but I'm gonna turn a bunch of these off, and let's just leave ourselves with this nice letter R. So with this letter R, I can change my camera, zoom it around. Inside of there, you'll see that this is just a motext, and it's got a bunch of different nodes or capsules inside it. I'll select all those and delete, and we'll build it from scratch. And from scratch means hitting NB. I've got this subdivided a whole bunch. It's just something I like to do to get even-ish looking geometry. So in this motext, or text object, I'm going to show you that in my object, it is set to subdivided points, and I'm saying every 10 units subdivide, and get rid of the angle so it's maxed out at 90. And then under caps, I set it to Delaunay with quad dominant so that these are nice kind of even and random looking caps. Excellent. So with all of that done, we just have this nice piece of geometry. Going into our asset browser, not even changing the layout, let's just go into the asset browser. Let's navigate into one of our different sets of nodes. Now, in the past, we've used these nodes inside of scene nodes, but now I can go into, say, geometry modifier. We've got this entire list. Normally, you'd have to be in the world of nodes to use these. But now, with no changes whatsoever, these can be dragged and applied directly onto models. So dragging inset as a child of the letter R, you can now see I've done an inner extrude or an inset directly onto this geometry. It's applying everywhere. So let's just step through this and try and make some fun things. This is currently applying everywhere because essentially nothing is selected in Cinema. As you know, if you extrude and you don't have any polygon selected, everything extrudes. So why don't we limit our selection? Moving into geometry selection, I would like to do a random selection. So we'll drag in this random selection, and now you can see only some of it is being inset. So that is based on this random seed. I can change that seed and get different selections. We could decrease the chance of selecting something or increase the chance of selecting something. And then inside of the inset, I could say, you know what? Create islands or use islands. And that means if they're right next to each other, they'll get inner extruded or inset together. So now you can see we got a couple of different outlines going on. Now that that's happened and we had that original selection, we can go into our geometry modifier again and grab ourselves an extrude. And after the inset, I will extrude. And now all of those are extruding and pushing outward. Make sure you turn on use islands so they actually merge into each other. Those don't have to go out nearly as far. So let's just actually let's do a -2. And now all of those will be extruded inward based on that inset. So you can see how parametrically speaking, we could keep on layering and layering and layering. And it just goes in this order of operations. So let's say we want to select all of them. This is actually a really important one. This is a brand new node. Again, this goes into if you're working with nodes or you're bringing them out into your object manager, which now means they are a capsule. But there is a new select. So dragging in the select, it is a new way of making kind of dynamic selections. So in this case, I can just say all, and now it's selecting all of the polygons. So now that they are all selected, I can go back into our geometry modifier and grab, let's say, a subdivide. And that is now going to subdivide everything because we selected all. Let's say it's a smooth subdivision. And now those are all getting rounded out. Hitting NB, you can see how these are getting nice and rounded. We could increase the subdivision again by increasing iterations, and that starts getting nice and smooth. It's not even the subdivision surface. It is just a subdivide node applying to all of the geometry. And because it's sort of a big, giant parametric hierarchy of modeling commands, we could always go back to the original random selection and change the seed and get completely different layouts based on that, or decrease the chance of something being selected, or increase the chance of something being selected. So these types of parametric modeling techniques are going to be really, really powerful, especially as more time goes on. But this has now made nodes useful to the average user. And once again, try and focus in geometry modifier and geometry selection. Now, just because it's fun, why don't we make another layout again? So let's delete all of these. In fact, let's turn off the letter R and I'll turn on 2. So now we'll work from this 2. You can see it's got that same amount of subdividing as well. So again, beginning with a selection, I would like a select, and let's just select all. So under 2, make sure we delete all those children. So now we just have the select. I'm going to say I would like to, again, select all, and it should be selecting every single polygon, and then do an inset. So then inset, so they inset, and then we have a delete. So then we can delete that, and all of those insides have now gotten deleted. With all of those deleted, how about we select everything again? In this case, grab that select and make a duplicate of it, and now we're selecting all polygons again. So then let's solidify. So here is a solidify. There's solidify, and drag that in. So we've selected all, and now solidify. That is a little strong, so let's just push that out 1, and you can see that it's taken everything and it's given it thickness automatically. So that is now thickness. Then let's again grab a subdivide, drop that in, and that subdivide is actually, look, it's only subdividing that inner part because we didn't select all again. It was working on kind of that active selection. So again, I would like to copy the select all. So now it's duplicating, selecting everything, and you now see that this subdivision, this subdivide is actually subdividing everything. Changing that to a smooth subdivision, you can see how these all get rounded out. We could increase the subdivisions there to make these nice and clean. If you want these to look a little bit more square, a trick we can do is grab another subdivide, and I'm going to put it before this one. And as soon as I do that, it's going to subdivide that. Let me just show you what happened. It is now doing a, let me turn it on and off. You can see right there, that's what it looks like. And if I click a subdivision, you can see that subdivided everything once, but it's not a smooth subdivision. So now when I subdivide that with some smooth ones, they're forced to be a little bit more angular. So we are now creating quite a bit of geometry just by layering these all up. But now look at this crazy mesh that we've created entirely parametrically. Like this is all set up and ready for any tweaks that we want to make to it. Being I could select this letter 2 or number 2 and then change it to a 5. And now everything's updated and that is propagated through to a 5. In addition to that, our select has other options. For instance, I can type in the word even, and now it's only going to select even polygons. Of course, the opposite being odd, so it's selecting odd polygons. We can type in specific ones, so I could say 1 through 55, and now polygons 1 through 55 have been selected. I could say 1 through 55, comma, 222 through 333. That's not a comma. There we go. And now you can see that those have been selected. We could also do comma even. So all of those are getting added together by stringing them in this way. So tons of different types of selections have been unlocked by using this new awesome, where is it? Let me show you proper. This awesome select node, which is something I really wanted. So with this in there, we can type all of these in. Let's go ahead and check out the help. So say show help, because even I don't have them all memorized. And we can see that we can type things in like default, which will just be what is carrying through. Odd, even, all, hidden. We can do a selection. So we could have already saved a selection tag and that can be pulled in. And then we can do index strings as I showed. And then we can use operations. So that means we can use plus, minus, and, but that also means we can type them in as well. So let me just show you. We could say I want, let's get rid of these black bars under camera, safe frame. Okay. So here we have all those crazy ones, but let's say I want all. Okay, that's fine. We can select all. We could also say I only want to see the odd ones. So there's odd. But if we say I want all minus odd, then it's going to be the opposite. Now the inverse of what those were is what is going to appear. So there are all sorts of crazy combinations to just type it in directly here in the selection. And that's not even counting the ways of combining these other ones. We have the ability to do something like a random selection and then store the selection. And then via that stored selection, say only the ones where it's odd and overlapping that previous selection show up. So the combination of more advanced selections and our geometry modifiers just makes things super crazy. So very fun. Definitely you should go and play around with this. For a final thing with nodes, how about we open up a brand new window and let's go into my node layout, because here we're going to build a brand new capsule from scratch. Here's the thought. I would like to create, let's keep it real simple, create a cube, and in that cube I'll subdivide it a few times, 5 by 5 by 5, hitting NB. You can see that we've got some subdivisions going, and I'd like to hide all of that environment. So let's go to filter, preset, crisp, just to turn off that environment. All right, underneath, actually, how do we make a brand new capsule? Well, you can do it underneath asset construction. Under asset construction, here's one called geometry modifier group. There's a bunch of different types, but I would like a geometry modifier group. Dragging that in as a child, it is now going to somehow affect the geometry. To see what it's doing, let's double click. This is actually what's inside of it. This is what it's doing. And now we can build something more complex just within this singular node. So currently it is taking in geometry and it's going to output that same geometry. So we could just directly connect those. And already you see that it was already combining those. But let's do something real simple. How about a bevel? Let's do a chamfer on here. So as a geometry modifier, I would like to track down a chamfer, drag this in. This wants to be fed some geometry. We can do that and output that. And now you can see we've got a nice little bevel everywhere. This is now a modifier that's doing a small chamfer. Now, of course, you could just do that directly with a chamfer, but let's make it more specific so it kind of becomes our own and becomes kind of a new ability that we can use. So I'm thinking we're already using point mode. Let's change this from fixed distance to proportional. And actually, we only want to go to 0.5. So let me show you. If we go to 0.1, we get a tiny little chamfer going. But if I type in 0.4, you can see that's going really far to the point where they're almost combining with each other. So if I say 0.5, they're actually, boop, just barely touching each other. So it's kind of like we've inverted this geometry. So we could even say, okay, that's what we're making. We are making the invert geometry, just as a name. So what do we want this to do? Well, currently that is chamfering everything point-wise, it's everything, but those points are not welded together. So if you were to bake that down, there's going to be 4 different points meeting right there. So let's optimize this. We want to weld it all down. We can do this via a optimize. So let's drag a optimize in. That's going to optimize all of the geometry. Currently, it's looking at the polygons. We want it to be on points. And that's the radius it's looking at. But right now, I'm not entirely sure it's selecting everything. So why don't we make sure we do a select all? So geometry selection. I would like a new select in between those. This geometry is going to be points, and I would like it to select all. And as soon as I do that, now I'm more confident that selected all the points. It has optimized them. They've gotten welded together because that's what we told it to do. And that is now a new piece of geometry. Let's check it out. If we were to make a smoothing deformer, so let's click on smoothing. I can drag that in next. And indeed, you can see that this is properly welded together. Let me show you, if we were to bypass that optimize, if I push this here, if I drag this, you'll see that those actually behave very differently. They are not welded together. So that step is really important. As I drag it in, we get a different result. So that has now properly inverted our geometry. Deleting the smoothing, we can now be confident that that's actually worked. That's invert geometry. What do we want now? Well, how about some controls? Inside of this chamfer, this size is the most important thing we have. So we want to create a brand new parameter. We could propagate that out, but I think I'd prefer for it to be a slider, a percentage slider, in fact. So up here, I'll right click in this input bar, and I would like to edit the resource. This menu is a little bit busy right now. I'm looking forward to in the future when it's more simplified. But the good thing for us right now is there's some templates down here. So we can find a different parameter, whichever one is closest to what we want. And in this case, here's what we want: a float with a slider. So it's an edit field and a slider. Dragging this up to our inputs. Now it's got this super crazy name, but that's fine. We don't have to worry about that. Double clicking it, I can rename this to, I don't know, let's just call it amount. So that is the overall amount it's going to be doing. moving inside of these parameters, you can see right here is our slider, and currently it's going like infinity. Actually, you can see I can drag it. It's going infinity. Well, I guess not infinity, like a million in the positive and a million in the negative. Let's change that. We scroll all the way to the top. In fact, is it under general? No, it's under data. We can give it the unit. I know there's a lot of options here, but clicking unit, I can say this is supposed to be a percentage. Now moving into the UI, I would like to limit the value. Currently, it's going to go from 0, it's infinity still, but let's limit that. I would like to limit the value from 0 to 100. And the default value, here's the step. I want to step 1. So now, as I drag this, look, suddenly it's not these giant crazy numbers. It's now going from 0 to 100. The best part, though, is it's not limited to that. We could drag that up higher. And actually, well, I'll get into that a little bit. Something I forgot to mention earlier. So we've got a default value we can set. Go back into data, and here's the default value. I'll set that to 100%. Excellent. So now we've got a slider going from 0 to 100, and it's allowed to go beyond that or potentially go negative. Excellent. That's exactly what we want. Click close. Yes, I'd like to save the database. So now we have an amount input. Now I want to control something inside of Chamfer. We specifically want to control the size, but the size is only going to go from 0 to 0.5. So even though the user should see it as 0 to 100, we need to modify that. So let's search for a multiply node. So I'll double click and that will open up this window. I can search for the word multiply. And inside here, we should be able to find a good multiply for ourselves. Here's arithmetic multiply under math. Drag that in, and we're done with that. So take this amount, drag it in as an input, and then take that output. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to multiply it by 0.5. So it's going to cut that amount in half. Now that it's multiplied, what do we want to control? We want the result to be output into the chamfer. So I'll just drag this in here, and it's asking us what we want to link to. Under basic, there is size. Selecting size, we are now driving that one. If we click on the chamfer, we can now see that the size is overridden by the word multiply because that's what's being fed in. So selecting our invert geometry, I can now drag the slider from nothing all the way up to 100%, which means a perfect bevel inverting that geometry. And we already know that once they boop, just barely touch each other, it's going to optimize it and essentially weld them all down into a nice clean model. Now that that's working for us, let's deselect everything, click on assets and say convert to asset, give this some sort of name. It's already invert geometry because that's what the object was called, and this is all fine for me. Say okay. And now if we go back into even a regular layout and jump into our nodes, I should be able to go to uncategorized. And inside of there, you see my invert geometry. So deleting this, even inside a new scene file or on anything, we should be able to grab, let's delete the cube, make something new. Let's make a sphere. So we got the sphere. I'm going to drag my invert geometry on top of it. And there you go. It's already inverting that geometry. Our default of 100% was applied. I can drag the slider down. You can see how that geometry is being created until it's all applied overall. And we are able to apply this just like we are any of the other ones. Let's duplicate that again. And now we have a second one. You see it's re-subdividing, but we can drag this up and you see how we get a second sort of diamond pattern coming out of it. And it's just a different way of thinking of that chamfer tool. And this could be limited to certain selections. Let's delete that second one. And before the first one, we'll say, hey, that should be limited to a geometry selection. And I would like it to be based on, let's shrink that down and go to a list. Shrink it down. I would like to do another random or a noise selection. So we'll do a noise selection and change it to point mode. And now that we're in, because we are affecting points with that, now you can see a random selection of points are saying only those should be affected. Let's say we want that to be the thumbnail. Let's go back into our uncategorized, find our invert geometry, right clicking on it. I'll say show the details. Let's take a screenshot. On Windows, it is Windows Shift S, and now I can drag a square over that. And then right click on here and say update preview from clipboard. And that has now become the thumbnail for my invert geometry, which is pretty crazy. I could give this different dependencies and or keywords, and we can version it, give it all the different meta information that we want. But we have now created our own capsule that we are able to bring in and apply to any object that we want. Resetting my layout. To wrap up, Matthias was kind enough to allow me to show off a couple of the plugins that we have released recently. We've been really busy over here at Rocket Lasso, although I just spent so long talking about capsules, I don't know how long I have to talk about this. So very, very quickly, Let me talk about Ricochet. Ricochet is a spline plugin. All three of these are spline plugins. Here are some of the Zygote figures from the asset browser in Cinema. I'm going to take all three, drop them inside a volume builder, inside a volume mesher, and we just get this blob where they're all kind of blobbing together. And I'm going to make sure that this dilate and erode is above so they inflate just a little bit. So now you can see that they're all holding hands, ready to go, one big giant mesh. So with this plugin, we can go to Extensions and find Rocket Ricochet. In some ways, you can think of this like a particle simulator, except that all happens at once. So what do I want to do? Well, I've got this Ricochet. I'd like to move it up anywhere in the figure. So let's scoot it up. Let's even move it over here into the middle of one of the figures. Just make sure it's inside. See, I've got the single line shooting out into space. If I tell that line to instead be fed an object, so I'm going to switch this to object mode and feed it this volume mesher, then the line disappears and we can kind of see it bouncing around inside there. Clicking this hide sources button is going to hide the geometry of the original figures, and you can see that we've got this line bouncing around inside. I'll grab the length here and start increasing it, and you're going to see the line bounces more and more and more. So cranking that all the way up to the end, you can see it's bouncing around these figures. Let's entirely hide those figures just so that they're clean. Move the Ricochet to the bottom. You can kind of see the figures as this bounces around, but let's add an extra 0 in here and get more bounces. And now you can see that that line is bouncing around very quickly inside them. And let's add another 0 on there. And now we've got 1 million in length bouncing around inside these figures. And if I zoom in, you can see how many lines were generated to fill these up and how quickly that was able to generate. So there they are, all filled up, ready to rock. We can do anything we want with this spline now. Simple thing, of course, would be to sweep it. So I'll feed that into a sweep. With the sweep, I will feed it a N side, which is going to be super huge. So let's lower that down to 0.2. NA, actually NA, so we can see the individual lines. And now we can see all of this geometry generating that quickly, filling up these figures. There's so much that this tool can do, and I've got entire videos and tutorials breaking down tons of different stuff, but you should definitely check it out. There's all sorts of automatic animation tools for growth and offset. There's a built-in rate, different angles. We can make this automatically adapt to the surface of the character. If I increase the alignment, you can see the curves start following the curvature of the characters. We have it wrap around the outside of them, and all I have to do is change any number here and everything will update. We can generate multiple lines. It's super crazy and fun. So definitely check out more about Ricochet. Actually, I did have another quick file on it. If I open this up, I can grab my Ricochet, which is trapped inside this letter O, give that a little bit of length, and we see these lines bouncing around inside of it now. Give that some rate on top of it, so now they're traveling around. If I hit play, you can see how those lines are bouncing around. And then deselecting, Ricochet is actually, let's apply all three deformers. Ricochet is being deformed by these different plane effectors, and so we kind of get these different lightning looks going. And when I hit play, now we get these different lightning bolts zapping all over the interior of this. Like I said, behaving kind of like a particle system, but there are no particles. I can jump anywhere in the timeline. We're going to see exactly what it's supposed to look like in that moment. Anyway, we got more to cover. So the next one is Mesh to Spline. Mesh to Spline takes a mesh and it will convert it to a spline for you. So in this case, I've got this car from the asset browser and I've broken it apart into a couple of different connect objects. So let's hide all of those. And keep in mind, we're going to be playing with the body of the car. So that's just this part right here. And you can see that we've got a decent amount of geometry on it. So entirely hiding that because we don't need to see it, I will create a brand new Mesh to Spline. Moving that to the bottom, we can do two things. We can drop it as a child directly, but I like switching this to objects mode. And now we can remote link into other objects. So I'll say I want to link to the car body. And instantly we see every single one of the edges converting into a spline. So I like changing the color of that. Let's change the display color to custom and let's make that a bright red. Why not? Deselecting. Now we got those bright red outlines, but Mesh to Spline does a lot more. It makes things nice and simple for you. Let's collapse that down. We can change the threshold here and decrease the lines based on how sharp of an angle they were. But we have different modes as well, including every individual polygon and even offset them from each other. And you see how that will animate out. Or we could grow or shrink the individual polygons, but this can be set to outline mode. And now every one of those polygon objects is being outlined into the shape of this car. So we could start layering these up on top of each other. So if I made a duplicate of that, here's a second one. This one can be set to edge mode with a certain threshold. Change the color of that one to be a bit brighter perhaps, and maybe orange. And now you can see it's kind of this highlight area of that. making another duplicate of maybe that outline. And you see the icon change based on the outline, or if it's based on tracing the edges, or it even changes again if it's in polygon mode. But making a duplicate of that outline, I could say, actually, this one is going to affect not the body of the car, but the wheels of the car. And then we get these rims coming in, changing that to maybe edge mode. We can change the rim threshold, pull back on this, get nice clean angles, change that to any color we want. Let's make that nice bright white, or maybe even kind of a gray silver, just spline wise. And we could keep on layering and layering and layering on top of this. Jumping to the final file of this one, you can see that I've converted every different part of the car into a mesh to spline. So everything we're seeing here is splines. But something that's cool is inside of any of these, we can activate the restriction field and feed in something like this linear field. So that's already set up. If I zoom out, I can start dragging this linear field through the car. And as I do, the different components are going to get erased out. Each one's mapped slightly differently. So you can see different parts of the car getting erased out as it passes through, until eventually the whole thing disappears and we're left with just the wheels. So it's very fun. There's a great way of getting sketch and Toon type looks inside of your renders, inside of your third-party renderers actually, and they render crazy fast because splines just in general are very fast. So converting objects via mesh to spline is really powerful, and this is just scratching the surface. Be sure to check out the full video for it. And then the final tool that we made recently, you already saw a little bit earlier. Now here I've got a big old Quixel bridge set up with a bunch of different models, and then this motion capture figure from inside the asset browser. Hitting play, you can see he's going to be jumping around, and it's got a decent polygon count going. Clicking the extensions dropdown, I would like to make a slicer. And again, I would like to remote link in to an object, and the object will be this jumping figure. Pull this down to the bottom, and I would like to move this up into the air, and let's hide the original character. And now you can see I've got a series of cuts. Selecting the slicer, let's make it a little bit taller, and let's create a whole bunch more cuts here, and we can see the figure reemerge from it. Let's make sure we're high enough so that he doesn't jump out of it. And then hide the preview cuts, so that'll get rid of this, and we just see the final splines. But this one does not have to return just splines. Moving into the geometry tab, this could return a series of flat cuts from the character, or it could return the extruded volumes from the character. Hitting NB, you can see what that looks like. Change this to percentage mode, and it'll actually kind of space them all out perfectly along the character. This could be, we could add bevels in here so we can get that rounded out or pull back. Even more fun, we can turn off these caps, and we only get these outside ribbons traveling along the character. If I zoom in, you'll actually see, if I hit NB, that, let's pause it, you'll see that just based on geometry, you can get these really pinched lines, which could give you some bad Phong layouts, but we built in this automatic smoothing. So if I add in an iteration of smoothing, those spread out and start looking a lot more even, and that should just be cleaner to render overall. And just for fun, let's throw that into a cloth surface and turn off subdivisions, but add in a bit of thickness. And now he's got the, yeah, let's go 2, why not? And now there's a bit of thickness to those. We get these big kind of Michelin Man layers going, filling up the overall character. And of course, this is all live, so we could grab the slicer and let's spin this to some other angle. So we can spin this up to the top so we can see the character in that orientation, or spin it around to the side and see it from the front. A lot of fun to be had with Slicer, and once again, barely scratching the surface of what it can do. There are so many more settings and properties. You see there's even more secret settings if you want to get advanced and add things like variation of the different layers or automatic animation, smoothing, stiffness. You can animate these, drive certain things through fields. There's a lot you can do. That should wrap up a quick demo of a lot of the work that we've been doing over here at Rocket Lasso. And keep an eye out, we have even more plugins coming out in the near future. So that wraps up my R25 presentation. Thank you so much for watching, and a big thanks to Matthias and Maxon for having me on the 3D Motion Show, as always. So if you're not already, you can follow Rocket Lasso at Rocket Lasso on all the different platforms. And if you like the live streams, the tutorials, and the plugins, the best way you can support us, of course, is to purchase a plugin. That way we unlock new functionality for you and we get to keep the lights on. So that's going to wrap this up. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.